Up, up, up. Hello and welcome to Vintage Garage. Glad you're here. We have another full show this week. First, we're going to continue restoration work on the Royale RP2. Today, we're going to mount the mirrors on the car. After that, we're going to take a field trip to Latimore Valley Fairgrounds for the annual Old Timers Convention sponsored by the Eastern Museum of Motor Racing. That should be a lot of fun. After we get back from Latimore Valley Fairgrounds, we still have time to do a little work on the Titan Mk6 Formula Ford. Today we need to mount the AMB transmitter unit on the car. That's a small electronic device that's now used by timing and scoring in vintage racing to time the cars automatically. So we have a full show today. Glad you're here. Let's get started. This is the 1968 Royale RP2 Formula Ford that we've been restoring. Last weekend we formed and mounted the windshield. This weekend we need to mount the mirrors on the car. After some study, we think the original mirrors were these aluminum wall press mirrors made in England, and we think they were mounted right here. We've driven a car before with mirrors here. The red Lotus 51 has the mirrors in this location, and frankly it's really difficult to see out the back of the car. When we got the car, it came with these aluminum mirror mounts. I thought they were original, but after research and studying the mounts, I could see that they're homemade. The intent of these mounts was to get the wall press mirror mounted a little bit higher and also give a little more range of adjustment to it for better vision. We thought about using that since that's the way the car came, but that isn't original either. So our choice was really, do we mount the original wall press mirror here, in which case we really can't see out, or do we go to a modern mirror such as these SPA mirrors? We're thinking we're going to mount these modern mirrors in the original location. These mirrors have a convex lens, they're adjustable in every angle, and they provide a great view to the back of the car. Since we're going to race this car, we decided that safety should come over originality in this one small case. So our first step is we're going to mark the location of the holes we need to drill with a marking pen. We want to have the mirror mount horizontal, and we're going to make a dot there and a dot there. Also, this mirror has a hex fitting in the base where an Allen wrench goes to tighten it. Rather than have to take off the mirror every time we want to tighten that, we want to also make a third hole between these two that's a little larger. That'll permit us to pass an Allen wrench through the hole and tighten the mirror without taking the mirror off the car. So just by eye, we're going to put a third hole exactly in the center. And that hole is actually going to be larger. We'll have two small holes and a large center hole. We mounted a 3/16 drill bit in the hand drill, and we're going to drill all 3 holes with that drill bit. Then we're going to mount a 5/16 drill bit to drill the center hole to a little bit larger size. We want to have it large enough so that the Allen wrench can pass through the hole with some room to spare. Okay, so now we have our 3 holes. We have our 2 small mounting holes and a larger hole for the hex adjustment on the mirror. So now let's bolt it in place. It comes with mounting screws, and they're also hex socket screws. The first step is we put those in. We're going to put small fender washers on the back, and then the washers that came with the mirror, and lastly we're going to put on a nylon filled aircraft nut on the back so that it doesn't loosen up. Okay, by hand we've put the nuts on the back of the screws. We'll move the mirror slightly out of the way, and we'll use a T-handle Allen wrench to tighten them up, and an open end wrench around the back to hold the aircraft nut. We'll get that one almost tight. We'll leave it a little loose so that we can do the other one and have it sort of self-center. Okay, we put that one quite tight. And we'll go back over here and we'll tighten that one up. Okay, now that's nice and tight. Okay, now we still have all this flop here that we need to take out. That's the purpose of the 3rd hole. We can put our Allen wrench in through that center hole and tighten it up nice and tight. So that also sets the angle of it up and down. And we'll also tighten the Allen socket screw at the top, and that tightens the tension on moving it in and out. Okay, so we have that mirror mounted. Now we need to move around to the other side of the car and repeat the same thing. We can put our Allen wrench in there and get this adjusted nice and level. Okay, so that's nice and tight. And then lastly we have all this flop we have to take out. That's what this adjustment's about. Okay, and now that's nice and tight. Okay, the next step now is to get in the car and adjust the mirrors at the proper height from the seating position of the car. So let's do that now. And we're done. We now have 2 very nice mirrors firmly mounted on the car, and they provide a great view to the rear and to both sides of the car. So we're real pleased with the job. It came out great. Car's almost done. We still have to recover the leather steering wheel. We have to install the fuel cell in the car and the fire extinguisher system, and that's about it. So we're looking forward to driving this baby. It's now about noon, and we'll take a break from working in the shop and drive up to Latimore Valley Fairgrounds just north of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Today is the last day of the Old Timers Convention there, and we want to get some video for the show. We're now at the Latimore Valley Fairgrounds for the event put on to benefit the Eastern Museum of Motor Racing. When we pull up, we see a great lot of stock cars and other interesting cars. We think it'd be a good thing to buy a pit pass. They're only $5, the best value in racing. Once inside the pits, we see a great lineup of vintage midget cars. That's our favorite class of oval racing car. There's also a good collection of vintage stock cars on hand. It should be a great day. When we got to the track, the stock cars were the next group out, so we went to the rail and took some video. The cars are divided into 3 groups for track time. There's a vintage stock car group, there's a vintage large open wheel group that consists of sprint cars and big cars, and there's a vintage midget group. The cars take to the track, one group at a time, alternating throughout the day. When the stock cars finished their session on the track, it was time for the large open wheel cars to go out. We walked through the paddock and took some video of the large open wheel cars, including sprint cars and big cars, and then went to the rail for their session. While the big cars were circulating, the midgets were getting ready to take to the track, and we walked around the paddock and took some video of the midget racers. This is the Barrett Special, a Ford V8 powered midget, and a really nice car. This is the Grant Speed Shop Special. It's a Ford V8 flathead midget. One of our favorite cars here. This is Gordon White, Smithsonian Motorsports consultant, who also writes the column Historically Speaking in both Victory Lane magazine and Vintage Oval Racing magazine. He's written a number of books on the history of vintage oval racing. Gordon, can you tell me something about your car?
Well, this is a midget, which was a class of cars that still race, but very popular in the 30s and 40s. This particular chassis was made by Frank Curtis, really the best midget chassis of its day in the 40s and 50s. It's got torsion bar suspension, which was an innovation in those days. It's got Offenhauser engine, which was the best midget engine in those days. There are a lot of things that Curtis did that were new to racing. Tube frame construction was not entirely new, but he perfected it in the United States. Little details in the suspension were very modern for their day, and they're still used today. Current midget looks a great deal like this, and the technology is quite similar. They're a little lighter and a lot more power these days. Well, these cars were the first American cars to have torsion bar suspension. This is the torsion bar right here. It's pivoted there and it's anchored back under the frame. This arm right here supports the car. And it goes up and down, pushes the bar, which is a light kind of a spring, and it's easily adjustable. And it was a step forward, a major step forward in race car suspension technology when these were built in 1945, 46, and into the 50s. This is the Offenhauser engine, midget engine, 4-cylinder, twin overhead cams, which was very advanced for its day. It's common now in American passenger cars, but not in those days, not in the 40s. It's derived from the Miller 122, which goes back to the 1920s. They sort of cut a Miller in half, an 8-cylinder in half to make a 4-cylinder engine. This was the best midget engine for 30 years. It was only outmoded because the rules changed to allow much bigger engines, and this couldn't be made that much bigger.
The vintage midgets were next on the track, so we went over to the rail to get some more video. After the track time session for the vintage midgets, it was time to head for home. We found this nice stone marker near the exit to the paddock, dedicated to the memory of those who died racing at Latimore Valley. We're back from Latimore Valley. We had a great time. It was nice to meet Gordon White. Now it's time to work on the Titan Mk6. We need to install the AMB transmitter unit on the car. This is the AMB transmitter unit that we're going to mount on the car for timing and scoring. There's an arrow on the unit that says that the track has to be down, and this has to be mounted vertically. There's 4 mounting holes that we're going to use, and in addition, the instructions that came with it says that it shouldn't be mounted anywhere where temperatures are going to exceed 140 degrees. We're going to mount it on this chassis tube right here. It's right behind the radiator, so that it can point downward and be close to the track with no metal below it. If it gets too hot and the unit fails, that chassis tube runs the length of the car, and we can mount it back further where it's cooler. We've moved over to the workbench now, and we're going to build the aluminum bracket for the AMB transmitter. I have this scrap piece of aluminum that I got out at the airport, and I use the unit itself to figure out the proper width for the bracket. I'm just doing this by eye. Make a couple of marks, and I'll use a square to draw a square line. All we're going to need is this little piece at the end. We'll mount the unit up here, and we'll bend a little L piece at the bottom that's going to mount to the tube. So let's move over to the shear, and we'll cut that. We want this edge to be pretty nice because it's going to show. So we want to follow the line pretty carefully. Get a nice straight edge. Okay, we have a nice rectangular piece of aluminum now, and that looks pretty nice. We'll round the edges a little bit with a grinder so it's not quite so sharp, and then we'll drill some holes and we'll form the bracket. The next step is to mark our piece of aluminum to indicate where we're going to drill holes to mount the AMB unit. We need 4 holes, and we'll just mark them with a pen. So we have 4 little dots on the piece. We'll use a center punch to put a small dimple at each place where we need to drill a hole. And then we'll go over to the drill press and drill the holes. The next step now is to design an arrangement where we can mount this to the car. We're going to mount it to a round tube. We don't want to make the mounting permanent because these A and B units are quite expensive. They're on the order of $300 a piece. And we have a half a dozen cars that we might be racing next year, and we're going to use one unit for all the cars. So we want to make our bracket easily movable from one car to the next. So in order to mount this, we're going to use just regular hose clamps. I think we'll use 2 hose clamps to mount it just so we have a backup in case one fails. And we'll need to make a couple of slots just like that. So again, I'm going to use the drill press to make those slots. But first I'll mark where I want to drill with the center punch at each side. Essentially we'll drill 4 holes, and then we'll connect those 2 holes with slots. So let's move back over to the drill press and drill those holes. We'll start with a small chisel, or chisel out the aluminum that's between the 2 holes that we drilled in each slot. And we just use a small file, and it won't take very long. We'll have a nice slot at each place where we want to put a hose clamp. Okay, we have a couple of nice slots now that are the right sizes for the hose clamps to fit. Next step is to make a nice 90-degree bend between the slots and our mounting holes. So let's go over to the sheet metal brake for that. We're now at our Roper Whitney Connecticut bending brake, and kind of a big tool for a small job. But we want to have a nice crisp bend to this piece. So get it in nice and square, lock it down, and then we'll bend the part. We're going to mount the A and B unit to the bracket using pop rivets. And when I have a situation where there's 4 holes and 4 rivets, I like to make sure all the rivets fit in the holes before I rivet the first one. So I like to rivet all of them with the rivets in the holes. Okay, that one looks nice. I'll do the one on the opposite side next. Now we've finished riveting the A and B unit to our bracket. Again, it's going to mount vertically, so this arrow is pointing down. We've curved the bracket a little bit. We're going to put hose clamps through the slots, and now we can put that on any tube of the car that we want. So let's move over to the Titan Mk6 and install this unit. Now the location we've selected to mount the A and B unit is right behind the radiator on this chassis tube. We're following the instructions pretty well. It's supposed to be close to the ground. There's not supposed to be any metal below it. The bracket offsets it so it sits out. Now we'll just tighten the hose clamps, making sure that the mounting plate for the A and B unit is vertical. Okay, now we've finished mounting it. Let's see how the front nose is going to fit on the car. Okay, we have a real nice fit. The A and B unit is out of the airstream so that it's not hurting the streamlining any of the body. And also we'll be able to see the light at the bottom of the AMB unit that indicates whether it's operating or not without taking the nose off. So that looks like a good installation. Now we need to wire it up. We'll thread the wiring for the AMB unit up through the car. We have to be careful that it doesn't get in the way of the driver's feet. We'll use tie wraps to tie it down neatly and keep it from being in the way. The last step is we'll put a couple of crimp connectors on the wires that we've inserted into the wiring harness of the car. There's a red wire coming out of the AMB unit, and that we put to a positive connection in the wiring harness, and the negative we put the black wire to. We'll turn on the ignition switch and see if the AMB unit comes on. And the green light comes on the AMB unit, indicating that it's booted up properly. So I think we're done with that job. That's it for this week at Vintage Garage. Glad you were here. We had a great day. First we installed the mirrors on the Royale RP2 that we've been restoring, and they came out great. Then we had time for a short trip to Latimore Valley Fairgrounds for the annual convention sponsored by the Eastern Museum of Motor Racing. It was sure great to meet Gordon White. Lastly, we installed the AMB transmitter unit on the Titan. That was a small job, but something that had to be done. So we had a great day. Next week we have another full show. First we're going to recover the leather steering wheel in the Royale RP2 that we've been restoring. Then we're going to take a field trip to the vintage races at Trailways Speedway near Hanover in Pennsylvania. That should be a lot of fun. We've never been to that track and we're looking forward to it. Lastly, we're going to install a 6-point seatbelt harness in the Royale RP2. That will just about finish the car. So until next week, thanks for coming. Keep the shiny side up. See you in a week. If you'd like more information about any of the projects we've worked on today, please visit our website at www.vintagegarage.com. There's a link to our email address on the website. Please email us. We'd like to hear from you. Till next time, keep the shiny side up. Thanks for coming. See you next week.